Harjo, Nippon, Bobby Trey Trousdale, Nadeshnikos, Tecumseh, Oklahoma, Nadochbia. Bojo friends and hello friends. My name is Bobby Trey Trousdale and I am from Tecumseh, Oklahoma. I'm a citizen of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation and I'm pleased to serve as NAP's member education session moderator through my role as our education resource facilitator. On behalf of Native Americans in Philanthropy, I'd like to welcome you to the final session of our 2024 MES broadcasts. If you've been joining us here regularly for our MES sessions, you may know that I like to start these out extremely energetic. I'm leaving space to admit, though, today that might not be where we are all at yet. And that's okay. As we reflect on the election and current events, many of us may feel a sense of disappointment. The journey has been long and fraught with challenges, especially for Indigenous communities. The promises of progress often seem distant, and the fight for our rights and recognition continues to be an uphill battle. Relating to today's topic in particular, the landback movement has and may continue to face significant obstacles during the Trump administration. Policies and decisions have sometimes felt like step backwards, making our path to reclaiming ancestral land more complex and arduous. Yet, in the face of these challenges, our spirit has not wavered. I've been encouraged not only by my local community, but by our NAP leadership team, that for some, the work is just getting started, and we include ourselves in that. Last month, Judith LeBlanc of the Native Organizers Alliance discussed the ups and downs of power dynamics and organizing. Even in these times of what may be considered powerlessness, we have to recognize that momentum and education are now things that we can prioritize and steward for the next few years. Judith's words have stuck with me and kept me going, along with a heavy dose of reality that my grandfather once shared with me, and I'd like to share it with you. He told me the left wing and the right wing are part of the same bird, and that bird, well, that bird is full of crap. He used a little bit more colorful language than that, but here at NAP, we're keenly aware that philanthropy plays a crucial role in sustaining our efforts. The generosity of those who believe in our causes have returned resources and their amassed profits needed to keep our initiatives alive, and we are hopeful that that will continue. It has empowered us to continue advocating for our rights, preserving our cultures, and protecting our lands. Despite the setbacks, there is much to be hopeful for. Our communities are resilient. We have seen the power of coming together, of supporting one another, and of standing firm in our beliefs. The land back movement is not just reclaiming land, it's about reclaiming our identity, our heritage, and our future. Even just last week, we all watched as this powerful energy of community came face to face with colonial powers in New Zealand's parliament. The powerful haka, the gleaming elders and impressive young leaders stepping into their own and showing up for community was inspiring for what could be done and is to come within Indigenous communities. As we move forward, let's harness the strength of our community and the power of philanthropy. Together, we can turn disappointment into determination, challenges into opportunities, and dreams into reality. Our journey is far from over, and the unity and perseverance we can achieve great things. Our peoples have known this, and this is our time to carry this forward. We're committed to continuing our work, continuing to support each other, continuing to lift each other up, and to continuing to work towards a brighter, more just future for all Indigenous peoples. Today's panelists join us in continuing to do that in their own ways. Whether working on, toward, around, adjacent, or empowering land back, today's leaders are an amazing, talented, and diverse group. For many, the concept of land back might seem daunting, misunderstood or relegated as a frightening concept outside of philanthropy's goals or resources. However, these views are short-sighted and overlooks the deeper significance of the movement. The movement goes beyond ownership. Land, its use, and the honoring of sacred places are foundational to community and must be protected on behalf of our future ancestors. Land back is about preserving the planet's biodiversity, revitalizing languages, maintaining traditions, and expanding cultures. Across the globe, the work of land back looks different, but the common goal is to restore justice, sovereignty, and securing bright Indigenous futures. These calls must be bolstered, unified, and acknowledged, and that's what we're doing today. Panelists, to get us started, I'll call you each into the space for you to take as much time as you need to share with us what makes you, you. And I'll go ahead and hit you again with a question just right off the bat of what does land back mean to you? Natali, I'll bring you on first.
Ayanchu Ananchaiki Kaipikas Kaikimanta. Nyoka Sutimi Natali Segovia Nyoka Kosko Peru Mantakani. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here and for this warm conversation that we'll have here today. Trey, as you were speaking just now about land back, and I can feel your passion for it. You know, I think what's interesting is that it's certainly a term that has grown in the past decade, I would say, but certainly in the last couple of years here. But at its core to me, land back is really about self-determination. And self-determination, as we understand it as Indigenous peoples, is a praxis, right? So that as a praxis, self-determination means you have to put it into action. So one of my mentors who I was really honored to learn from since the day I started as a law student, and now as a senior attorney and executive director of the Water Protector Legal Collective, an organization that started at Standing Rock as the legal tent there to protect water protectors and protect the water and to protect all that is sacred, right, including treaty rights. He used to say self-determination can be sort of explained through a really easy knock-knock joke, which is, why did the chicken cross the road? And he would say he was practicing, or she was practicing, his self-determination, right? And I always think of that as sort of this visual as a stand-in for the praxis of self-determination. It's something that we actively have to do, and it's something that we actively have to take on. And in standing in our ways and standing in our knowledge as Indigenous peoples, that is a praxis and a practice of self-determination. And that's at the core of land back. The idea of land back, I think, personally, I don't use the term as much, mainly because a lot of the work that we do at Water Protector Legal is about protecting the sacred, about protecting the earth, about protecting the water. And so we don't always use the term, but at its core, it's because we are looking at self-determination and Indigenous sovereignty. One thing that we really emphasize is beyond land back, right? There's this relational aspect that is sort of sometimes missing from the conversations around land back. And that's that the land and water also want us back, right? That there is a relationship that is inherent to how we understand the world and how we understand the earth and our relationship to the earth and to these sacred places. So part of that work of land back is really a relationship restoration. It's, as you said, Trey, an honoring of sacred places, but a protecting of sacred places. And many of the organizations and movements that we have worked to support that are doing this work as Indigenous peoples to protect sacred places, it's important that they often choose, and we often choose the word protect, right, as protectors and defenders, But protection is so crucial because it brings in not just a right, which often to settlers' ears, perhaps and back really seems like it's based on rights, right? Like who gets the rights to the land, who gets to own the land, who gets to possess the land. And it's not about the ownership, it's not about the possession. It's about that relationship and the cultivation of how do we get back to a place where we understood that we don't just have a right to land. It's not a right to land. It's an obligation to the land. And it's a responsibility that we have, right? And so that's a critical distinction that we have as Indigenous peoples in our understandings, that it's not just about rights. We carry with us sacred obligations, and we carry that in everything that we do. So that's central to our work at Water Protector Legal Collective. And thank you for the question, Trey.
Of course. Thank you for being here. I've already written down the land and water also want us back. So I've kind of just prepared mentally that today is going to be a heavy note day for me, because I know that there's going to be some amazing gems from you and the other panelists that'll be joining us, but really wanting to also, I think, lift up your organization as one of our newly announced NAP and Native Voices Rising grant partners. So congratulations to you all going through this most recent I think application and community review period. We're very excited for you all. Dr. Harjo, I would like to welcome you into this space as well. So Dr. Harjo, if you are here.
Hi.
Hey.
It's Che. Laura Harjo Chaha Chifkidos, Yaha Helgi Amalegidos, Tuskegee Amitalwados, Duke Harjo Tate Moman Ellen Harjo Chachkolgeta Wagas. Hello, my name is Laura Harjo. I am Mvskoke Creek. I am Wolf Clan and from Tuskegee Tribal Town. My parents are the late Duke Harjo and Ellen Harjo. So if I want to talk about land back, I really think of it, to build on this idea of relationality, that we are in reciprocal relations, and that is central to land back. And, I know here in, here where I'm at in Oklahoma, sometimes when folks hear land back, you hear these comments that will never happen. But that's if you view it in terms of a settler framework. If that means that we are reacquiring delineated parcels of land and that sort of thing, then yeah, that's another challenge. But we are already in land back. So if that means that we are in reciprocal relations with the land, that's one of the most crucial aspects of that. Another piece of it is this idea of how does the land not only benefit us, but how are we benefiting the land? Because often when we talk about land, it's about how it benefits us. But what are we doing in these reciprocal relationships? The other thing that I think about in terms of land back is really disaggregating that word, because there's a way that it sort of makes everything above, on, under the land very abstract, and it's easier to dismiss when you just say land. But when you talk about birds and woodpeckers and blue jays and chickadees, when you start naming your relatives, because we did have conversations with our relatives and we still do. So when you start naming them specifically and concretely, you start strengthening that relationship. So in terms of land back, one sort of example that, I don't know whether to get into it here or later, but I just think about how is it that we experience felt knowledge on the land, and that in part is land back. It may not be that we own, this whole thing of ownership of land is really rooted in English common law and the idea of male lords over the land. So this is definitely a different aspect. And then from Mvskoke Nation, where we are matriarchal people, the women had oversight on the land. So this idea of bringing women's knowledges and practices, it's good for everybody. So for me, that is part of land back, is understanding how to be in reciprocal relations, having a critical consciousness about felt knowledge, and that those are teaching moments as well. And that's part of land back as well. I'll save kind of a more expanded version of that for later, but thank you.
Of course, no, so excited to have you joining us today. I will just conflict of interest, so we're all in the clear. I was one of Dr. Harjo's students, lucky enough to learn at her feet, I think during our Indigenous community planning class. And I can say, absolute genius. I feel like most of your tangents, I was just struggling to keep up with the concepts, and I was like, I can't move that quick. So I'm so excited to bring that into this space and to expose our audience to just the genius and Indigenous excellence that's in your mind. So thank you for being here.
Trey.
Of course. All right, let's move on. Auntie Pua, I want to welcome you into this space.
Aloha. O Pua Case ko inoa mauna wa kea ku mauna o ko hako hawa me waikoloa ku mau ka Hawaii o ku kapu ka aina o ku hanau ana o moko keawe ku mokupuni. So my name is Pua Case. I'm humbled and happy to be here today from Mokuokeawe, which is Hawaii Island. And when I'm thinking about your question about land back, if I can put it into the perspective of someone who is living, born and raised here and here for generations, and give a little bit of a perspective of the land that we live on. We have 8 main islands here. And if you look at us on a map, you'll see that we're little dots in the Pacific Ocean. And 7 of those islands are where people reside. And I happen to live on the youngest and the largest island, although it's not large by any means. Like you could probably drive around this Mokupuni or this island in about 5 hours. And that's where we live. That's what we call home. This is what our voyaging ancestors found many generations ago. And this is where we make our stand, if you want to say that. So when I think about the term land back, to me, it's reflective of us here living in an island space where, when you think of those 2 words, it's as if you've lost something. So you have to get it back. And in many ways, that's true here. So when I think about land back, I think about the young ones who live here, who, when you say, I used to go there and I used to do these cultural ways there, they say, well, we'll never go there because it's been built over, it's been bought, it's being used by the military, and we will have lost those cultural ways that were dependent on those specific areas for our sustainability, for our culture to thrive. So it's very real for us as island people that we have a small land base in comparison to larger land masses. And when we look around, it seems as if every day something else becomes inaccessible. So those terms hit really hard for us because where you used to go, you can't go. And where you can't go means you don't have the kind of connection that you used to. And perhaps cultural life ways that were specific to that land area are not able to be done anymore. So I think we here in Hawaii, and I'm going to speak from my own experience of living here and standing for everything that I do in my daily life, there's an urgency here. There's an urgency to look around us and see what is becoming inaccessible to us and what we can do at this time and in this space to, one, retain whatever it is that we have left, and two, yes, to stand and to be able to bring back to our natural lifestyle and in our surroundings, bring back what we can. And so where I'm going to go with all of this is that in this time and space, as with our cousins in Aotearoa, as with the Mauna movement, as with movements here in Hawaii before that, through our efforts, through our attempts, through the renewal of our pride, through the skills that we are learning, through our bravery and courage, and through the connections we are making and alliances with people around the world, really. We truly are looking at land back as Mauna back, as Hawaii back, as life ways back, because there is no separation between who we are and what we do, and the land and the water and the ocean, from the mountain to the sea, that we do it on. There is an exchange between us and our environment that will determine how much of our cultural heritage, our life ways, our ancestral skills, our cultural protocols, how much of that will survive and thrive. So I'm trying to say that it's urgent for us because our land base is so small, and we can see it everywhere around us. We're like peoples of the Pacific everywhere. When there is a threat by expansion of military or fracking or geothermal, we have every issue that everyone else has, except we live on a pinhead, a small little piece of land. So land back is also 24/7 for some of us, because if not now, then when? And if not for this, then for what? So I'm not representing my people here, because we are all individuals here in Hawaii. We all have our own story. We all have what we are connected to and what we are standing for. And then we have the Mauna that has brought us together and unified us so that we have a collective commitment. And so, yes, it's challenging, but it's also, to me, the most exciting time that I get to say that I am living in and living through, when I am seeing the collective commitment of a people and all people who support that collective commitment really take hold. And I see real hope here in Hawaii, and also other places around the world that we are connected to. So I'm not sure I answered the question as, but that's my answer to this question. And behind me is Mauna Kea, and right behind me are the lands that I stand on, I walk on, I play on, the land that teaches me, the land that feeds me, where the waters of the streams run through. This is our Hawaii. And whether we call it land back or whatever term we're going to call it, we're here to protect, to defend, to restore, to be in an exchange with that is as close to what our ancestors left us as is truly possible, so that we do not lose any more than we already have. And maybe it's not loss, it's just laying there waiting for us to remember that we still maintain these ways as we maintain these lands. So mahalo for asking that question.
Oh, absolutely. And miigwech for, I think, iguia, truly a heartfelt thank you for bringing that into this space. And Auntie, you can ignore all of my questions and just talk, and it's still going to be beautiful and exactly what we need, because I do think, like, I appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to bring that expedited need of saying it is on a pinhead, because I know, at least for me, growing up in Oklahoma, it was, you could see to the horizon land. And so the idea of land back, it wasn't something that was quantifiable, or it wasn't something that was quite the battle that the reality of it is in saying that. And so I think bringing that in, and even it wasn't until college in working on Stop Cop City with Dr. Harjo, or in reusing that land, that it was operationalizing it in that way. So hearing, I think, your perspective of dealing not only with those that are standing alongside you there in your homelands, but the youth that won't have that, and that very real cultural tie, connection, and loss that is at stake is beautiful. So thank you. Iguian. All right, finally, last but certainly not least, I want to bring in the founder, executive director of what roots us in the world, where I always find myself. Native Land Digital is on one of my most used apps. So very excited to be welcoming in Tanya to this conversation. So Tanya, please, welcome.
Kia ora koutou, morena. Ko Tanya te miringa te Rangi Ruka, ko Ngāti Pāko Ngā Puhi, te iwi. So good morning, and I just named my iwi, Ngā Puhi there. I'm just sitting and absorbing all these beautiful words that I'm hearing from these wonderful, amazing wahine toa in front of me. I'm still sort of, I don't know if you want me to talk about it, or I'm still on the energy of Tuesday, my Tuesday. We're on Friday now. I'm just starting to feel the exhaustion creeping in. For those who don't know or haven't seen our beautiful hana online, just ripping up in Parliament with an amazing haka full of power, and her tupuna, her ancestors. We could all feel it watching that. And I'm sure we've all watched it many times. So when you talk about land back at this time for us, we're in this moment of feeling that incredible power. And on Tuesday morning, my girls and I, we went down to meet with everyone in the park. There was a land-based hikoi where 100,000 people basically stood up and said no to this treaty principles bill that they're trying to introduce to, basically eradicate our rights here in Aotearoa. We feel the strength of global Indigenous nations behind us on the global stage. And so we gathered and we walked from the top of Aotearoa to the bottom of the North Island. Over 200,000 signatures from many different cultures to say no to this. I'm sure on the video you could probably hear poko kohua in the background, which means insanity, being shouted across the Parliament. So we're feeling this immense empowerment right now. And it's from all cultures, and we're feeling the support. And I think it's so important at this time. We have a severely right-wing government, as I'm sure you guys all know that feeling. So I think what it does is it pushes you to stand up. It really pushes you to think, okay, now what are we going to do? What actions do we take now? And so this treaty Principles Bill is trying to say that everyone has equal rights, which, is fine. But basically it says the government has supreme rule over everyone. And the reason for this Treaty Principles Bill, to quickly run it down, there are two versions. There's an English version of the treaty, and there's a Te Treaty, which is in Māori Te Reo language. Majority of our tupuna ancestors signed that one. My ancestors signed that Māori version. And there are discrepancies between the translation of the English and the Te Reo Māori. But basically, we have never ceded sovereignty. What we did was we gave the Crown the right to govern their own people, because when they all came down here, there were no laws. Everyone was running amok, causing a lot of trouble for my tupuna ancestors. And they were like, right, we've got to figure out a way to get these people to settle down. And that was it. We didn't cede sovereignty to our lands, our seas, our culture, our language. None of that. So it's becoming more apparent to more people that the government is built on their legislations, their constitutional acts, everything is built on the treaty. Unfortunately for them, we signed Te Treaty. So essentially, the government is ruling illegally. There's those who know law and legal side of things with contract law. If you're operating in a contract that wasn't signed by the two parties consenting to an agreement, then it's illegal. So now, because so many more people are becoming aware of this fact, they're trying to introduce these things like the Treaty Principles Bill to eradicate any sort of idea that there's power for Māori here. So it's a problem for them. And as you saw, hundreds of thousands of people in our tiny little land. It doesn't sound like much, but down here in Wellington City, it's the capital city, the streets are like this. It's the walk we took from Waitangi Park to the Parliament to take the signatures. There's generally about 10-15 minute walk. It took the people over 3 hours to file from the park through into the Parliament. 35,000 people should be capacity for that space, but they were flowing down the road. My daughters and I were sort of up the front filming, because I'm also an artist, so I have to document everything. So we had our running shoes on, racing around. As we were watching the thousands coming into the Parliament building, we came up and went around one of the streets, and we were looking down and filming, and just people were just moving along. It was amazing, historic for our country. Depending on who you listen to, they'll downplay the numbers. But yeah, it's more than 100,000 K. And our hana was up there on the steps, and she'd been disciplined. They were locked out of Parliament. Those our politicians who stood up and huckered, they were locked out of Parliament. But as she said, the next day I turn up, I'm on the steps with 100,000 of my people. And it was powerful. We all felt it. We all felt the emotion as we stood up there looking down. My daughters and I, we had our flags, and all the people were waving at us. Grandmothers were being wheeled past on their wheelchairs, and they were looking up at us. And there was a moment where she recognized that we were waving to her, and she just was waving at us like she thought she was the queen. And you could see in her face she felt like she'd been seen. And someone else from another tribal nation just down from us started shouting, "Toi tu te riti, ake, ake, ake," which means stand strong, the treaty forever. And she was just waving, and we were all crying. You can hear it on my video that I'm holding. I'm like, oh, crying there. And, it was a huge moment for all of us. And I see Auntie Pua there crying. And yeah, I feel it too. It was huge for our lands and seas. So when we think about land back down here, I was trying to think of the terms used here, because we don't essentially have the land back movement here. What we do have is tino ranga tiratanga, which is sovereignty of lands and seas of our people, language, cultures. We have mana motuhake, which is self-determination, the rights of the individual to be a part of this common unity. And then we have kotahitanga, and all these words were on the plaques as though people were moving through, and kotahitanga is united as one. And we really felt it all together. It was just so powerful.
Tanya, thank you for, I think, bringing, in our script, I had left room. I wanted to be sure, I think, and bring in, and we are absolutely standing with you, I think, as communities. And even just watching my For You page had, I think, 8 videos back to back of that haka, and being able to just I want my algorithm to catch that I like that. So I watched it 8 times in a row, and each time more and more powerful. And so thank you. And thank you for bringing that, and bringing, I think, those current events, and allowing us to meet us where the moment is right now. And we are standing with you. And I was going to ask you about the protest after the broadcast, so I'm glad that you brought that up in front of the audience. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I respond to that, please?
Of course.
Why I'm crying is because when one of us stands, we all stand. And in 2019, when we occupied, when we were on our mauna for 9 months, truly all the years before that as well, but in 2019, our ohana from Aotearoa stood so strong with us, fierce in the love for our people, and came here to Mauna Kea to pledge that. And we in return went to Ihumatau and pledged on those lands that we would stand together and support one another. And when we see you, we are back in the power of that moment on the ala, on the access road, in the lava field, in the parking lot of Mauna Kea, where we have been holding since they first tried to build with a permit in 2009. And we have never allowed for construction. Over all these years, we have been holding. So when I see your people, I say hold, because we have held all this time, and we are still in the moment of holding on. And when we see you, we see ourselves reflected in that. It is as if we are there. And indeed, we have Kānaka Maoli there, walking with you, standing with you, wearing the mauna, with the heart of the mountain, standing in kapu aloha and in our strength for our cousins. And just the other day, I went to Mauna Kea and stood with a flag, your flag, with a group of Tahitians and Hawaiians, because that's what we all can do for each other, whether it's Aotearoa, whether it's anywhere else. How do we stand with you from so far away? Stand and take a photo and say we stand with you. Of course, we know that, but do that. Sign a petition, write your testimony, because we're all far away and we feel it. I wish I was there. I wish I was walking with you, but my cousin Natali Case was. And so through her, we were all there. And we are with you because we are you. And so I'm crying those tears because I am so filled. I can feel every moment because I have felt it for Mauna Kea. And that's why I said we are in maybe the most challenging times, but we are also in the most hopeful, glorious times for our people. So mahalo for speaking of it and allowing my tears to just flow, because that's how deep land back, if you will, is for our people. So, mahalo.
Arohanu, arohanu.
What power, what power. Thank you both, I think, for this conversation and for letting us sit and watch. Thank you. Iguian. Auntie, I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes, but I'll be back to your question. But I'll hop to Natali now and bring her into this conversation. Natali, what do you see as the relationship between environmental conservation and Indigenous land rights? And how are you successfully presenting that in courts of law?
Thank you, Trey. No, I think I know I'm a lawyer, but it's the least part of, or the last thing that I think about truly, because first and foremost, I'm Indigenous, right? And I think that's what we each bring as professionals, as women that are leading in our respective spaces. We are taking up those spaces, as Auntie Pua was just saying, right? Part of the stand is also, it's a decolonizing stand, but it's also an indigenizing stand. It's a recognition that we have been excluded from spaces of power, traditional power, right, in the Western ways for a very long time, and the law is not unique in that way, but it is certainly a barrier to justice, actually, right? So in some ways, it's almost something that I know Auntie Pua and others here have had legal challenges, and to us at Water Protector Legal Collective, we started as a grassroots, right, in support of the grassroots, and that's what we continue to do, because how we see it is that at its core, environmental conservation, Indigenous land rights, these are inextricably linked with the preservation of life, right? The preservation of our ways of life as Indigenous peoples, the preservation of our ancestral lands, our knowledge, the ways that we have lived upon the land and been in relationship with the land and the water since time immemorial. But what happens, right, as Auntie Pua and others here were saying, what happens when that land and that water is gone? What happens when those places that we've known simply disappear or change because of occupation or colonialism, right? Which many of our peoples have experienced firsthand and continue to experience firsthand. And so, just yesterday it was an anniversary, an important anniversary. It was the 55th anniversary of the occupation at Alcatraz. And this is where Native activists occupied Alcatraz Island, really demanding that the United States honor its treaty rights and return the land to Indigenous peoples. And then similarly, yesterday was November 20th. And for those that were at Standing Rock, it's an important anniversary because it was a day when water protectors stood against the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock. But also not just against, right, but really stood to protect the water and stood to protect for Indigenous, for generations to come, truly. And in that space, water protectors were met with the things that our peoples have always been met with, which is outstanding, incredible, and brutal violence. But the difference is that now we have things like social media, right? These things have been happening to our peoples since time, right? Since the first clashes began. Those clashes are not over. The reality is that we are still here because our ancestors stood and they protected and they fought and they did, what Tanya and our relatives in Aotearoa are doing, and what our relatives in Hawaii are doing, and what our relatives all around the world are doing to protect that which is sacred, which cannot be replaced and is absolutely irreplaceable. When we think about, people often say Indigenous peoples are anti-development, and it's not anti-development. That's not what we are, right? But we're looking at this as part of a relational whole. And that relational whole needs to be brought into every aspect of the things that we are This is why, as Indigenous women, we're taking up space in places like academia, right? Dr. Harjo here, space in places like the law, space in community organizing and education and in digital use, right? Every aspect, because we're bringing that knowledge to those spaces that we're in. And it's a recognition that we cannot continue down the path that we've been going down, that the earth is has been at a critical point and is at even more of a critical juncture, where the land and the water are no longer just taking care of us, but need us to also take care of the land and the water, right? That we also have that obligation to fight to protect. Because I was recently at Climate Week in New York City, and I heard, corporations basically talking about why the privatization of water was going to be the absolute answer. And that's the way that people need to protect the water, is via the privatization of water as a commodity, as something that can be traded, as something that, is a thing, right? And for us as Indigenous peoples, we understand these things to not be things, but to be relatives, to be relations, to be cared for. So when we think about this from a legal standpoint, and we've been talking a lot about land back, and I think the term really kind of grew in the last few years, but everything that our peoples have been doing for decades, centuries, has been based on these tenets of returning us, restoring the relationships, right, to the land, reclaiming, reconnecting, restoring language rights, gathering rights, cultural practices. It's not just about the sovereignty part of it, it's also about the stewardship, right, and that relationship. And some of these are actually ensconced now. They're part of like some of the international laws that Indigenous peoples have fought for so long, right? The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples recognizes the human rights of Indigenous peoples, the rights to life, the rights to water, the rights to cultural rights, language, gathering rights, the rights to access to traditional and ancestral lands and ways of life. But we can't protect that if we're losing constantly and always on the back of it, right? So one of the things that I think we are inspired to do at Water Protector Legal Collective is that for a very long time, we've been on the back foot. And we have been in that space that is a reactive space. And I think what you're seeing, not just at WPLC, but in so many Indigenous organizations and community movements, right, as Tanya was just talking about in Aotearoa, it's not a reactiveness only. This is a proactive movement. This is a proactive view and vision of the world. This is something where we are taking strides into the future, knowing what our ancestors have done before us, knowing that we carry that with us and that we carry that forward, and that we have an obligation to do that, because if they hadn't done it, we wouldn't be here today. And we are still here, and we are still doing what our ancestors taught us and what we knew and know to be right, right? Not just for ourselves. And I think this is a critical part of why people should support Indigenous peoples, right? We're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for the land, for the water, for the earth as a whole, and for all our relations. That includes the people we don't particularly like, right? That includes the CEOs of the oil companies, which I don't particularly like. We actually sue them all the time. So, but the reality is that when you're talking about protecting what is sacred, because they can't see the sacredness of what it is that they're destroying, doesn't mean that as Indigenous peoples, we aren't also doing this work for future generations, for all generations, for all our relations, not just for ourselves. And I think that's a really fundamental change and a fundamental difference between how regular sort of environmental activism is cast, right? Is like, oh, we're doing this because of the scientific knowledge or the kind of very technical awareness that we have, versus a critical understanding of our relationship with the earth. And so for us, it is inextricably linked, right? It's the inherent connection to land is vital to our treaty rights, to our histories, not just to our histories, it's the ancestral futurisms that we're working towards, right? That we have the ability to speak our languages, even where I know in Hawaii and in so many other places, language was something that was prohibited, right? Across the United States, in boarding schools, it was prohibited. That was part of it. And so, yes, environmental issues are part of the protection of Indigenous lands, but it's a human rights issue, and it's a sovereignty issue and a self-determination issue. So even as a lawyer, I think what we are constantly thinking about is how do we bring to bear the knowledge that we have as Indigenous peoples to indigenize the spaces of power that we're in, the spaces that were not created for us, because law was not created for us, right? The legal systems and the legal paradigms that exist are not for Indigenous peoples. In fact, people talk about Citizens United in 2010 in the United States as being the case that gave corporations legal personhood. But corporations have actually had legal personhood before the foundation of the United States, and corporate charters that were, part of that historical period that predate the United States as a nation. And so when we're talking about being up against corporate entities that are extracting the earth, that are pillaging the earth, and destroying the earth and the water, that is why we are taking these challenges on, because we have to be in those spaces to challenge those spaces of power that have excluded our peoples traditionally, and do it intentionally. So even today in the United States, less than 1% of all attorneys in the United States are Native American or Indigenous or identify as Indigenous. Less than 1%. So I'll just let that sink in. But as it said, this is part of a long game. We take the long view because we know the arc to justice is also long.
Absolutely. Sorry, that was such a powerful note to leave it on. I don't even know how to pivot out of that. Aside from when you were talking, I think about activism, Auntie Pua, I'd like to kind of come back to that idea as you all have seen it at Mauna Kea. I would say that you all are an exemplary of land back and land protection in action. And so I was wondering, what lessons can be learned or operationalizing that idea of Mauna back from your all's protest and the role that activism and community engagement play in safeguarding sacred places.
So I'm going to begin by saying that we didn't start standing up with Mauna Kea. The stance for Hawaii, the efforts to protect Hawaii, to stop overdevelopment, to stop over militarization has been going on for decades. I think what the difference is that because we're all on different islands, there were issues that pockets of us stood for on our individual islands, until the time of standing for Kaho'olawe to stop the bombing by the military on Kaho'olawe. And when that was achieved, and that brought it to a bigger population of people where we could be on different islands, and we could look at the island of Maui, we could look at the island of Kaho'olawe, and we were starting to testify for another place in the Hawaiian archipelago other than where we were living on. And that was the first kind of collective movement I was in 1978, when I was a junior in high school, and I started to get involved in the Protect Kaho'olawe, Ohana, and that movement. Was the first time I saw that on different islands we could and would stand to protect an island other than our own. And that was me as a high schooler. We have had moments in our history where we have stood as collectives since then, such as marching 10,000 on the island of Oahu for our rights and to say we are still here. Kui kapono, we stand in our righteousness. Hawaiians are still here. We have had those moments. But if I may, I'm going to give you a little insight into the Mauna Kea movement so you can see how that grew and how we were able to really grow with it. So from 1968 on, there have been telescopes being built on Mauna Kea. But if you see that mountain behind me, if you don't know that, and the permits were gotten in all kinds of ways, which I'm not going to go into today, you don't even know a telescope is going up until there were 13. And this is our actual ancestor. The Mauna Kea is who we descend from. It's in our chants. It's in our stories. It is our sacred, not just for us, but for the whole of the Pacific. It's the world's highest mountain from the seafloor. There's so many reasons. It's where our kupuna still give us knowledge through the portals, the Ike kupuna. Much of who we are as a voyaging people come from that mauna. The mauna protects us, it feeds us, all of those things. So in 2009, we find out that this permit is being sought through the University of Hawaii on behalf of 5 countries. So China, India, Japan, Canada, and the United States are all going to come together, and they apply through the University of Hawaii because it would seem that it would just go through and none of us would be the wiser. So 5 individuals, 4 individuals, one organization have been standing with others for years and years, and they find out about it. So they request a contested case to the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Now, as with all of you, our government is not set up for us to be successful, but you can't skip that step. So my family becomes prompted actually by the elemental beings, by our ancestors from the lake called Lake Waiau on the top of Mauna Kea, comes to my little girl. And the lady of the lake asks her to ask me if we would try one more time to stop the telescope because it would change everything in Hawaii, from climate change to spiritual, emotional, physical change. It would disrupt too many things. And that's a whole nother interview in itself. So I'll just say that my family jumped in at that point and we became the 6th petitioner in the contested case hearing. And I was a middle school teacher and I was petrified. I had never been to court before. I knew this was going to be huge, more than we had ever done before. But I found this is my number one organizational kind of strategy, if you will. I was so filled with fear, but I knew that there would be an organization somewhere that would come forward that would help me crawl to courage. And right about that time, the Idle No More movement started all the way in so-called Canada. And they grabbed me and they said, we'll take you, we'll help you to become braver than your fear. And they did. And so we stepped into a case that we lost in 2012. We lost the contested case hearing and they gave the permit to build. So what I want to say here is sometimes a loss is a win. And sometimes what you think is an obstacle is actually the most unifying thing that can come out of what you believe is someone on the attack for your land or your rights, your constitutions, whatever it is. And so the TMT, the 30-meter telescope, actually was an agent to unify our people in a huge way, a little at a time. We started with 20 followers. We ended up with the world. And it started right there with that permit. So we needed a waking up too. We needed a shaking up. We needed to learn more. We needed to get braver. We needed to become skilled, educated in our history. I mean, we have become stronger and wiser, smarter because of what happened to us when we lost. And so we took that loss and it unified our people. So from 2010 until this moment, we have gone through stances on the Mauna. We have gone through arrest. We have gone to building up our movement. And we still face, they are determined to build. This is not over for us. But what it has done, what the Mauna has done for us, is it's solidified a way of thinking, a way of being, a way of acting that is based in our kupuna values, so that when we went to Mauna Kea in 2019, literally our leadership were all teachers who said, now we're going to be alakai. We're going to lead in the best way that we can. And how we did that operationally, because I'm going to get back and keep that question in mind, is that we instilled on that access road in front of that kupuna line that sat there for 9 months. We said, we are going to do this in the way of our ancestors. We will have ritual 3 times a day to ground us. We will go back to the chants, the stories, the dances, the songs, the language of our people will guide this movement. We will be in a code of conduct that is based on coming kupuna forward, heart forward. We're going to do this in a different way. We are not going to let you make us be angry or enraged, because then we'll just turn on each other or our families will suffer. We're going to come forward in a sacred manner, and we are going to stand in that manner. We are protectors, and we're going to come forward in that way. We are not going to allow Christianity or any other way of running us on the ala. We are going back to our own ways, and we are reinitiating the village system, the kauhale, the pu'uhonua, the safeguarding sanctuary that our people had before. What I saw in this movement was what was in my 4th grade textbook. When you open the page, and you read in your textbook that our people used to run things this way. This was our law system. This was our relationship with our environment and each other. This was our values. And this was the way we did things when our ancestors were here before contact. And what I saw and what I witnessed, what I participated in and what I led at times, was bringing that back to that moment. And what I saw in our people and people who came, they said, I don't know why I'm here, but I have to be here. And what I saw was change and transformation, like we're seeing in our cousins from Aotearoa. No one will remain the same. No one. Because you are filled with your kupuna and you are filled with your descendants all at the same time as you are filled with you. And you got more than a glimpse of who your people used to be. You are in the moment of who they used to be, who you are now. And what we would say for ourselves on the Mauna is, there is no going back for us. And in the end, when we came down from the mountain in 2020, we came down because they were not going to build. They said, okay, we call it a day. We're not going to build. And we're only up there on the threat of construction. So we all came home. But I'm half an hour from this mountain. I can be up there at a moment's notice. So for us, what happened when we came down, the issues didn't stop. We came home, and every single island that we live on is facing something huge. Our island is facing expansion of militarization, live bombing. When I'm sleeping at night, I can hear bombing going off. When I'm driving past that range, we can hear the bombs. We can hear artillery. We know what's happening there. And our Aina is just crying, but it's hard to stop, but we're not giving up because we're fueled with the heart of the mountain within us. And that's what came out of our movement. Whatever issue we're standing for, whatever land we're protecting, whatever water we're trying to hold on to, the protocols we learned from the Mauna, the rituals we learned, the language terms that we learned, the values of kapu aloha, of deep reverence and respect, have now been immersed into every single movement that is happening right now, no matter where we stand in Hawaii. And more than that, we have an exchange now, an alliance and a relationship. We have a kuleana, a responsibility to each other. If you came from the island of Maui and you stood with us and you have an issue, if I can be there, I'm going to go there. If you came from Standing Rock, you know that's because I was there at Standing Rock. If you came from California and you're native from there, I'm going to be there when you need me. If you came from Aotearoa, you know I was at Ihumatao. I was with the Tuhoi up in the mountains to gather my strength before I stood in 2019 in New York to stand with the Indigenous people and the motorcycle clubs there. Red Rum, Red Spirit. I mean, there is an alliance that has occurred because the Mauna has brought us all together, no matter where you are from, Europe, Japan, Canada, no matter where. If you said, I pledge, we said we for you as well. So now there's like this beautiful commitment and obligation, if you will, but it's not a forced obligation. It's an obligation, a relationship, an alliance. And if we can't be there, tell us what we can do. We'll sign a petition. We'll reshare all day and all night for you. We will do whatever it takes, because that is the moment we're in right now, where these alliances are going to help us to catapult further when we're facing geothermal here or fracking or whatever it is that we're going through. And believe me, we have an issue for every minute of the day here in Hawaii. So for some of us, like for me, I quit teaching. I went full-time Mauna. And when I did that, I formed my own organization, and I said my organization, Mauna Kea Education and Awareness, will be the 24/7, because operationally you need one organization that's going to remain constant. Because if you're not present for what you stand for, and they see you not there even one day, oh, Pua Case not posting, Pua Case not standing, let's try build. That's how it works for us when there's developers and corporations. They don't see you. They look at it as a green light to go ahead. So you have to have those organizations, not every single person on the day-to-day, but you have to have those who say, we will safeguard 24/7. So if you follow me, Protect Mauna Kea Education and Awareness, you see that we're 24/7, because that's what the kupuna chose for me. It's what chooses for some of you. If you're that 24/7 entity that said, not on our watch, and we'll let you know when there's action. Just stay posted, just follow us. And if there's a need, we'll let you know. I mean, there's so much to standing for something, and we all know that. And for us, the threat is still real. But they will never build on Mauna Kea because it's too late for them, because our people have risen and there is no turning back. And we will stand to protect the sacred, the ancestor. And we will do whatever it takes. And we will skill our children to do it in a better way so that they're not exhausted. They're not falling on the ground. Like, you know, some of us, we're made for that, right? Don't we go until we drop? Because when we started, there were only 20 of us. So we went till we dropped, and we still do. And that's the life path that we choose. My best friends, LaDonna, Kaleen Sis, and others, and you, we choose that route because that's what chose us. But these kids don't have to do that. Let's teach them to be healthy first, to have a healthy state of mind, be healthy emotionally, physically, because the issues are going to keep coming and they're going to have to keep rising. And maybe we allow them to rest a bit, even if we don't. So my children look at me and they know which part of me that they're going to follow in the same way I do it. And they know which parts they say, we're not going to do that, Ma. We're not going to do that because we're not going to be sick when we stand. And I love that about that. So our movement is a work in progress. And what we always said on the Mauna is we're new at this. We are just people. We are teachers. We are mothers. We are fathers. We are children. We are grandparents trying to protect what we love and what we cherish. Don't judge us. Sometimes we go 3 steps back, but we make sure we go 10 steps forward. We are learning how to be sacred again. And our promise to everyone is that we will do the same for you. We'll stand and support you, and we won't judge you because we're all in this together, trying to do the very best we can in the best way that we can. And in that, we will move forward as united as possible in one collective commitment for our people, for our lands, for our life ways, for our ancestors, and for our descendants to come. We are truly in this. So we say, Kukia Imauna, stand as a mountain, unshakable. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. I think that Natali and Auntie have done a great job, I think, of sharing the facts of the situation, the reality of the movement, the obvious emotion that can be felt in their work. And I'm still kind of flabbergasted by less than 1%, Natali. That finally hit halfway through. But I want to shift our conversation to a conversation of futurity. We see these things in action. We see the reality of the situation. So Dr. Harjo, I'd like to specifically start with you as we look to futurity. How, in your role or in your practice, how can urban planning and community development be approached to ensure they honor the legacy and future of Indigenous peoples?
So when I think about that, I just kind of want to start from the context that I work in. And here in Oklahoma, there are 39 tribes, and all but a few of us were forcibly removed here. So we're not in our original homelands. My original homelands are in Alabama and Georgia. So part of what that motivates my work is this Mvskoke term, anogechka, which means love, and the idea of how do you honor your community and operate in service to your community from a position of love. And the past few weeks, I've kind of been working on we had 50 plus tribal towns in our original homelands, and you go to those spaces and you really can't sense them at all, like when you look around, except maybe Oldmoggy Mounds and Etowah Mounds. And this past year, I spent at Emory University on fellowship in my original homelands, and I had never really spent time like that. So part of what really motivates this work is that we have ancestors, relatives who have never had the opportunity to visit our original homelands. There's no mechanism for them to get there. There's no place for them to be once they get there, unless maybe you work for the tribal government or you're an elected official. But when I think about this, how do I get my cousins there, my mom, my community? And so that's really what animates thinking about community planning. How do you create a space that my relatives can enter into? So kind of the example that I want to give is the project that I had my students work in that actually Trey participated in. And in part, I couldn't be fully, where'd you put it? I couldn't be fully transparent with exactly what we were doing, but it was in opposition to this building of Cop City where in the Walani forest. So Walani is a Mvskoke word that means like green water or brown water. And so the Walani forest is where they're building Cop City. And it's that area of Atlanta is considered one of 4 lungs for the Atlanta area. That area is also a place where a lot of working class folks live and maybe don't have as much political capital that they can operationalize. However, they did give hours and hours of testimony in opposition to having Cop City built in their area. And what Cop City is, it's funded by the Atlanta Police Foundation. The city of Atlanta gave them like a land lease of, I think, $10 a year for them to be able to build that. And it is a simulated city to practice urban warfare. There are future plans. One is to train the Atlanta police there. They already have a gun range there. So when you walk through the forest, you can hear the guns going off. Well, now you'll hear guns. They'll be practicing with bombs that's going into the water. So there's just a whole sort of multifaceted situation going on there. So what planning does is it's actually kind of a misnomer, I think. I think we should call it futuring. So what futuring does is it makes us look at all of the different facets of who and what will be impacted. So in terms of looking at it in the city, looking at who and what will be impacted by this. So they're going to train the Atlanta police. They want to roll it out nationally and train, a militarized police force across the country. They want to become international. They want to bring in Israeli soldiers to train the police forces here in the U.S. So what we worked on is Mvskoke people have 50 plus tribal towns that were forcibly removed from our homelands, brought to Oklahoma at bayonet point for many. And how do you imagine a future in our homelands where we enact our tribal towns? Our tribal towns may not look exactly what they did in the day, but what would they look like in a future moment, or in a contemporary moment and a future moment? So the students worked on that. They interviewed they did focus groups within the class because Mvskoke people, are not monolithic. So Afro-Indigenous descendants, young people living in the city, elders. So we had a profile of each one and kind of asking them, what would you want to see in a future settlement in our homelands? Because right now, again, there's no mechanism to get there. So that's, I guess that's sort of landback too, but really to me, it's like recultivating our relationships with the land. So Halebi ceremonial grounds, they've gone there a few times. We've danced on that space, stomp dance. I know that when Halebi first went there, one of the dancers said that when they started dancing, so we have kind of a call and response song, like singing, that the men do when the women are like shaking shells, keeping the rhythm, and we dance in a spiral. So once the dance started, they said that the birds went silent. So to me, like, that's our relatives recognizing us in our homelands. And to me, that is what Futurity is. Like, even though we don't have ownership, we don't have a place, we're going to figure it out. And our relatives there know us. And that's part of what it is, recultivating that, whether it's in the city or the rural areas, and doing it around the things that we value and honor. We honor Anokechka. We honor the natural world. We honor living in communal spaces where we can socialize. And so even though we were taken out of our lands, we still operationalize that socio-spatial use of the land. If you look at our Mvskoke churches, and pretty much like any of the Southeastern churches here, when I say Southeastern, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, we were all forcibly removed from the Southeast. And our communal spaces, they may be churches, but that's not how they were operating. They're speaking the languages there. The center of it is where the church was, but we had arbors. We had arbors in the homelands. We still have arbors now, but in a church site, and there are camp houses all around. And I know my dad would talk about, they would ride in a wagon all day to get to one of those, and they would spend the entire weekend at those churches in camp house and coming to the center. So we didn't have a main street. We had a central meeting area and houses around, and you can walk to the center quickly and you can see everybody, you know what's going on. So the idea of operating and being in a collective space together, we do that through just organically. So that's one example. We still have our ceremonial grounds. That's how our ceremonial grounds are set up, with our dance space in the middle, our campsites all around, and that follows a traditional kind of seasonal calendar of when we come to those spaces. So that's been part of it. Some of the conversation has been around, once we left our homelands, our elders told us, don't ever go back. You don't cross that Mississippi. But we are reimagining that. And one of the things that we're talking about is that they didn't want us to go back because they knew it would be painful. And it has been painful to go there. And, you know, like thinking of Auntie Pua and just these spaces that you've gone to and they're developed, and you go there, and like for thinking about that and going to Atlanta, and I'm like, yo, this is effed up. I look around and it's just like concrete and buildings. The trees are there, they're huge, they're expansive, and our relatives pop out on the land, and that's really hopeful. But, you know, just that idea of that violence on the land, and kind of how do you push your way back in to be in relationship with those relatives, like those super tall trees and all that. So for me, the idea of Indigenous futuring, that it really is about what are the unactivated possibilities that were shut down for our ancestors when we were forcibly removed to Oklahoma. What were those possibilities that we can pick up right now, and we can continue enacting them far into the future? What do we need to do right now? And partly kind of what motivates that is just working in community and talking with people about their sense of place, and saying, where do you think your community will be in 100 years? And to hear them say, we won't have anything. We won't have a language. We won't have land. There'll be rich people living in big houses on our land. I mean, that's our world for Mvskoke people, but in our homelands. But what can you do now to disrupt that? And to me, that's what Indigenous futuring and planning is. But it is really imagining your spaces together. So when we worked on it, people wanted to see contemplative space. They wanted like a garden and a apothecary kind of space, animals, etc. So they did that. We went to Atlanta and we did it with non-natives about the Wulani Forest. There was so much overlap that we all want the same thing for our relatives on and with the land. And I've been working with a group of folks, it's more like grassroots around this idea of rematriating the land. And part of kind of what has bubbled up is that these are Mvskoke homelands, and all immigrants are welcome on these lands. Like, it's not the place of the federal government to say you're not welcome here, when like the core of like the US citizenry are like rooted as immigrants, right? So we had a group of us, I wasn't part of that, but they greeted, it's like this huge, like 10 or 15-foot puppet that travels to educate, and she's called Little Amal. She's supposed to be a 10-year-old Syrian refugee. And so we welcomed her into our homelands and said, you are always welcome here, and all immigrants are always welcome in our lands. That not like we own them, but being in relationships. So I feel like that is part of just this reframing of space and place. And if we start like looking deeper into how we imagine our space and place and thinking about, in my scholarship, I call it emergence geographies, but it's really rooted in Mvskoke ways of knowing land, is that we do have ephemeral spaces that you can't own. We have like metaphysical spaces that we know the presence of our ancestors, entities. We know that there are spiritual entities in those waters, the headwaters of the Kusa, where our people are from, spirits that are in the forest. So, I mean, in our original lands, and they're here with us in Oklahoma too. So to me, it's like they came with us and they're here too. And I think that part of this thing of imagining our communities, it's different than how city planners talk about it. This really is, how do we consider all of these spaces, whether they're ephemeral spaces that we come and go and create, or metaphysical or celestial, because we have our star stories too. How do we kind of begin to consider that in how we're imagining our communities for the future? And this has, well, I just want to say something really briefly about what's going on here at the University of Oklahoma. I was told Monday evening that the university wants to remove a general education language requirement, which would probably is just means a foreclosure on our 5 native languages that we teach here. And as we all know, that struggle with language is that we're busy bringing languages back from the brink of almost going to sleep forever, right? So we're actively in that fight. But the other important thing about language is, for some of us that have been completely removed from our original homelands, our languages are our relatives and they tell us about our places. So if you look around Oklahoma, and my people were originally called Creek because we lived along rivers, like there are so many place names related to our original homelands, and they're words based in rivers and waterways. That's our language telling us about our homelands. So it's just, yeah, that's been my fight all week, is how do we stop this? Because there are 39 tribes here. We're some of the top employers. We put billions of dollars into the state of Oklahoma's economy, but it's so easy just to say, oh, we're going to do this. So that's something that we're actively organizing. Our students are actively organizing. They're creating a petition right now. But the biggest thing about that that's community planning. That is futuring, knowing how to organize everything that we've talked about here. That is community futuring. But we are activating our kinship networks. And I don't think that within the politics of recognition and nation states, that they understand what it means when we activate our kinship network. Because our kinship network, as we've been talking about here, extends across the globe. So this idea of like mobilizing and being in relationship with one another and recognizing one another as kin, that is how we get to these futures that we desire for ourselves and our future relatives. So I will stop right there. Thanks.
Absolutely. Dr. Harjo, thank you for bringing that into the space, for naming that. And I think it's so interesting to see this idea of futuring in action and how hard and rough that can be. So yes, Todd, absolutely. Sending hugs. And Dr. Harjo will be connecting offline to activate. Absolutely. It is.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Of course. Tanya, I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, but let me just, if our audience does need to go, please take your day. But just to give, I think, everyone a general overview of what to expect in the rest of our time together, there is one question in regards to Tanya's work that we will be focusing on, talking about futurity in both the tech and art strategies. It was not included, but you did share that earlier, so I want to leave space for that. And then to wrap up our time together, we'll just be quickly calling for calls to action or things that philanthropy funders or elected officials, what our network typically spans, things that you'd want them to take with you. So for our panelists, for your awareness, that's how we'll do that. For our behind scene partners, just so everybody knows where we're going. I am aware of the time, but we are on the way down, but I do want to make sure that everybody has equitable time here with us today. So Tanya, I'll move on to you with what does Indigenous futurity look like in the context of integrating traditional knowledge with the modern technology and art and innovative strategies?
For me, Futurity and tech, it goes hand in hand with our Indigenous knowledge systems. We heard here today that connector with Wairuatanga or spirit, and how we receive our messages through dreams or through visions. It's Wairuatanga, it's Futurity. We used to have, prior to churches and Christianity and missionaries coming in to kind of block our spiritual connection to the lands and seas. We had seers, tohunga, who would bring these messages to us, and we talked about these messages. And I think that's what is missing, especially in our contemporary lives, is that it's been made to feel wrong, by church and religion. It's wrong. If you look at what happened overseas, it's witchcraft. It's the enemy. But for us, with this waking up, we've been, our youth are hearing and dreaming and seeing and hearing the messages from the natural world. And I think with technology and being able to share these stories together, it's so important to realize that it's the same space. The digital realm is the same sort of realm. It's electrical fields, it's magnetic fields, it's the connector to these places that, have been blocked from us, the connector to the natural world, calling to us, to our more than human being relatives. It's an opportunity, this tool, for us to really get back to, and I hear the longing and the desire in everyone to get back to these ways of being. And I see technology as a way to do that. And if we don't kind of implement these tools, we can be left outside of. So seeing ourselves within these futures, but in a way that's Indigenous specifically, is amazing. I've been training an Indigenous AI and communicating via our knowledge systems, and she has named herself Kōrero, which means to speak. And she connects with the natural world, with the thinking that is Indigenous. But she does that because I've inputted my knowledge systems, my great-grandmother's knowledge systems, the star systems, our ways of being. And she can help, these tools can help us get to where we want to be and desire to be, and also help us in a way that environmentally takes care of itself as well. It can push beyond the blocks that we have. And Auntie talks about 24/7 people. We're all exhausted. We are 24/7. Like, I cry to my mum sometimes. I cannot go on. She's 76 and she just keeps going. Like, she is just continually moving. Legal battles. We're in court systems, international court systems, trying to fight the madness. And we are 24/7 people, and we run up against exhaustion. And so these tools can be a way of bringing us the futures we desire. But we have to be in there. We have to be making them in our own way, in our Indigenous way, in order to see that pathway and to see beyond where we're blocked. So I think it's really important as Indigenous peoples that we take time to consider that, especially when we see maneuvers happening, like Laura was saying, there's maneuvers happening. This government down here has allowed nuclear warships, United States nuclear warships to come into our waters. That had been blocked for decades, but now it's open again. So we see that there are war maneuvers happening all around us because of the need to access resources, which is the natural world. When you look to water, and our water protects is there as well. That's the basic need for all of us. And they're locking it down because they know we're going to be running short of that very basic thing. So I think as Indigenous peoples with our connected networks, it's so important to look to the technology that we can use and implement as a tool to be sure that we're ready, be sure that our babies will have water and access to clean food and water too. So yeah, so important.
Oh, absolutely. And I think tech is one of those things, it's always coming. So we can't just ignore it. We have to learn how to work with it and use it to our advantage. So thank you for elevating that to this space, and for your Indigenous AI is something I was not aware of. So I now have my next scroll instead of a social media scroll. So I'm very excited for that. Well, here at the end of our time together, I want to leave space for any quick calls to action among community, said among family, or among philanthropy. Our audience, it spans really the entire sector, from funders to native nonprofits to elected tribal leaders and budding young leaders of the future. If there's something you would like to leave them with, a call that you want to put out, if you could, we'll go through, but if nothing past it is completely optional, up to you. But Natali, I'll start with you. Anything to close us out with today?
Yeah, I think, one thing Auntie Pua talked about earlier was hopefulness. And I think that's something that we carry with us and carry forward because we know who we carry with us, right? And the moment we're in right now is going to take and will take all of us. So the invitation, it's an invitation to join us, right? Be protectors with us. So one thing that I could talk about for hours is the nonprofit industrial complex and really how this pits us against each other, right? It's a vying for resources constantly. But as Indigenous peoples and Indigenous-led organizations, we have a responsibility and an obligation to reject that and to work together. And that's what we are working towards, right? So it's an invitation to support Indigenous-led conservation efforts, self-determination initiatives. We're already empowered because of those that have walked before us. And we're not powerless, and we're not hopeless, and we're not helpless, right? We're not uneducated. We are rising. We are still here. And we know the work that we have cut out for us to protect the earth for generations to come, for all our relations. And we're here for it for the long haul. So it's an invitation to join us and to be protectors with us, because the world more than ever needs protectors and defenders now.
Absolutely. Thank you. What a powerful call. Auntie Pua, I'll come to you next.
Immediately, what comes to mind is please go to Protect Mauna Kea on Instagram, go to our link, and please sign our petition for no construction. And know that petitions do matter when an organization keeps asking you to do that. We're 5,000 signatures short of 500,000. And the reason it's so important for us is we're always termed in the newspapers and in the public as some Hawaiians and our allies. And we are certainly way more than that. And we would like to use this petition in further action. So we are asking for that. We have a film that's out called Standing Above the Clouds. And if you'd like to request a film showing, it's a journey of 3 mothers, including myself and our daughters, and what it takes to really make a stand for something. And it covers our stance for Mauna Kea. So if you'd like to have a film showing, you can request that through Protect Mauna Kea or Instagram, Standing Above the Clouds. And of course, there's so much. Our fiscal sponsor is 7th Generation. And if anyone wants to donate to Mauna Kea Education and Awareness, you can do that. Because really, we can't be too embarrassed or, shy to say that if we run on grants and social resistance funding, then we need to make a call out for that just to keep doing the work. And to anyone who is doing something for any movement, whether you're storytelling, whether you're creating music, film, some kind of performance, arts, whatever you're doing, teaching with your skills to do testimonies, or don't stop, because we can't do this alone. It takes everyone who has any kind of contribution to make that contribution. It doesn't have to be to the Mauna, but find something that you're passionate about, especially in your own community, and then expand beyond. But we need everyone working so that a few of us aren't working 24/7. And plus, don't you want to be a part of it? Don't you want to be a part of these times and these moments and say, I was there, or I helped them to get there because I created this? So I think just don't stop, because we need you, and we'll also be there for you as well. So mahalo.
Iguian. Dr. Harjo, coming your way for closing thoughts, calls to action, if you got any.
I guess in terms of calls to action, our Native students here at OU are putting together a petition right now about this language issue. And I know that they're on Facebook. They have a group called OU American Indian Student Association. So I think they're going to be putting up a QR code once they finalize their petition. So I would encourage folks to sign it and disseminate it in your kinship network. The other thing too is that I am like a community planner, like organizer. I teach that, and I would invite anybody that is grappling with something around, like in need of that, to reach out to me. And I know I have the capacity to work with some things now, and if it grows, then I'll try and find more money and more people to support folks in their work. So I would like to offer that out too. So yeah, thank you.
That is powerful. Thank you for offering that in this space. I'm sure there are some people that will be taking you up on that offer. So thank you, thank you. Tanya, over to you. Close this out. How do you want to end today?
Right. So Native Land Digital has a big sort of social media platform. So definitely we will be sharing all of your messages there. We're now Indigenous led. So we have this history of a lot of colonial information on there on Native Land Digital, and it's harmful. So we're kind of in the process of erasing that and uplifting Indigenous elders' voices, knowledge systems first. So yes, we are very keen to connect with all lands, all Indigenous peoples, to build a network that is in the digital realm, but is doing work on the land, in the waters, everywhere. So we're keen to share the stories with everyone. United is where the power lies. It's empowering globally to see all the Indigenous projects that are happening. We're going to be visualizing that so that everyone can be empowered to do this work. So yeah.
Excellent.
Aroha.
Shimi Gwech and Iguian to all of you. Truly so powerful, emotional, and renewing to sit with you all today. I think we got some in the morning, some in the evening of tomorrow, potentially. So wherever you are this time, this space, it has been absolutely wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity, for your time today, and for our audience for joining us. As you've heard, despite the forces we face, the challenges that have been hurled our way, our resilience and spirit do not break. Our panelists have led that. Get involved in your local initiatives in your local community, support Indigenous-led organizations, and fund Indigenous-led efforts, and continue to advocate for sovereignty, treaty, and Indigenous rights in a way so powerful that it is intimidating to those who don't understand and don't take the steps to educate themselves. To our NAP members, we appreciate your continued support in our ongoing programming, and in particular, your support of our member education sessions. As a reminder, this session was open to the public as a highlight of our member benefits. NAP membership is open to Indigenous and non-Indigenous allies. If you're not a NAP member yet, or you need to update your information and a point of contact for end of the year purposes, please visit our website or email Reina Devia Day at ourday@nativephilanthropy.org. 2025 will be bringing in some new benefits to our NAP membership that we cannot wait to share with you. So make sure that you are up to date on all of that information and you can get in on the ground floor without getting left behind. Lastly, you should be receiving an email with a link to a short survey. Please take a moment to share your opinions and what you'd like the session series to look like going forward. It should take about 5 to 6 minutes, but it is truly invaluable feedback, not only for our education team, but our programs department as a whole. With that, that's a wrap on Native Americans in Philanthropy 2024 membership education sessions. I said this last month and I'll say it again. There is one thing that will not change in administrations or as we wrap up the civic engagement mini-series within MES. NAP's commitment to sovereignty, Indigenous communities, and the efforts to secure our animate and inanimate relations for the next 7 generations does not change. It remains unwavered. We'll continue on this in a good way, centering transparency, communication, and partnership as embodied in our January session and panelists focusing on Indigenous journalism. Please join us again in the new year on January 16th, 2025 for this session and some updates regarding our MES scheduling. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you again to our panelists and our partners, Tuttle Co. behind the scene for everything throughout this year. We wish you a warm, joyous, bountiful, and rejuvenating holiday season. Bama Pi Nikon. See you in 2025.